Ajax says Snowball is bad. Well, it's not 100% what he says, but he talks about the 30-second jungle start and what that has to do with Snowball in his most recent Tumblr post. Now, we have a lot of Season 5 stuff to work through, and I wanted to get this out of the way beforehand because I thought this was something interesting to address, and it also has something to do with Season 5 and how the approach in Season 5 is. So in this video we'll cover that as well as the extra stuff from the last blog post that we hadn't covered. Let's begin with the 30-second jungle start blog post. Back in early Season 3 and before, Smite Conquest players had plenty of time before minions met to farm their jungle. Different wolves would start at their jungle buffs and kill them first. They would then go to lane after and would already be level 2 or very close. In many cases, the opposing team would do this simultaneously and then just meet each other in lane. Nothing new here for most of the players that have played at the time, so we'll just move on. Then one day, some SPL pros had a revelation. They would stop playing nice in the early game. They would stop just clearing their own buffs before minions. Instead, they would draft a strong level 1 team and invade heavily into the enemy territory at the start of the match. This strategy was extremely effective. Losing levels and buffs was a crippling way to start a match. This practice became commonplace in SPL by the time Season 3 Worlds came around. It also became commonplace in high MMR ranked matches. Little note here, at later stages this also trickled down to lower MMR matches. I'm pretty sure I wasn't high MMR at the time and you would see that pretty much anywhere. This type of level 1 invade meta was interesting for a few reasons. It was quite fun from a spectator point of view. This led to a lot of action early on and big cheers from the crowds when big plays were made. This is true, but at the same time I also remember some people being quite upset about some of the things that would happen in context with this. For example, level 1 trades with the then version of a golden bow, or throwing dagger rather, with crit being a heavy factor in early game trades and things like that. So not all was just fun and not all was cheered for in that regard. It brought a few gods back into the meta, like Thanatos, for his ability to deal insane damage with a single ability at level 1. However, it had some powerful negative side effects. Extreme Snowball. As exciting as those few minutes were, this made the rest of the match rather dull. In most cases, teams were just too far behind to do anything after a successful level 1 invade and gank. Matches lasted a normal length, but fewer kills happened in the late game and the lead was never challenged. This happened actually quite often. The level 1 invade would often determine at least the first 10 minutes of the game, and after that there was a little bit of a chance to turn it, but often the invading team would have basically won the game straight up, and you kinda only countered that by picking a level 1 comp that was strong enough to prevent that themselves basically anyways. While Snowball was always a factor that was complained about in Smite around the time this was the case, this was the situation we were in, it was probably complained about the most. Second point, overwhelming pro frustration. I know that the pros and devs can struggle to communicate from time to time, but this was not the case here. The design team was hearing widespread complaints on a daily basis about how stressful and frustrating the strategy was. They did not want to continue. These two are the reasons above why we launched Season 4 with new timers. The entire jungle now waited until 30 seconds to spawn. We heard the pro frustration and saw how extreme the situation was, so we imposed very strict game mechanics to deter it. We gathered feedback from pros after Season 4 launched, and although there were some other questionable design choices, we got unanimous feedback that they were happy with the 30-second spawn system. It deterred level 1 invades and forced players to choose between which parts of the map they would farm. I personally would think there was some negative feedback for these changes as well, because I know that quite a few people weren't as happy with the new change, with the new system, because it felt just very unused to and very uncomfortable for them due to various reasons, just preferring starting in the jungle and not a lane, things like that, or not knowing where to start exactly. But it kind of figured itself out over time, and at some point everyone was just kind of accepting it at least. I think these two are the biggest reasons why we still get so much feedback about this issue. It was really only executed at very high levels of play. Average players didn't experience those level 1 invade fights. Again, this point is surprising to me because I have experienced these fights and I would say that I'm definitely more among the average than the high level players, but well, I guess maybe we just experienced it a lot later. Also, players formed such strong habits to start at buff camps, it felt very odd to them to play Conquest differently, and this is exactly what I was referring to before here. These factors have made this change very difficult to adjust to. I think that starting in lane feels natural and is a good way to help newer players learn Conquest, but it is clear that veteran Smite players are having to fight their instincts on this. We have even seen the meta to evolve where people kill buffs first anyway and miss half the wave or more, which is what we saw at the end of last season. Either way, the spawn timer change was extremely effective as its original goal. Remove the level 1 invade meta. There are no plans to go back to the old system because we strongly believe that a level 1 invade meta would quickly return, and we know how unsustainable that meta is. Even with Season 5's anti-snowball changes, we are very cautious and want to avoid the level 1 invade meta. Season 5 will bring some slight adaptations to jungle spawns, where speed buff is the only camp that will spawn before lanes meet, allowing the jungler to get a head start from the rest of the team, allowing more flexibility in how they plan their jungle route after obtaining the speed buff. Now I think this is a very good approach overall. I think that Snowball was an issue in Smite for a long time. It wasn't so much lately, but before that it was. And the buff starts definitely contributed to that, the invades rather. So I think Ajax is spot on with that analysis here. I think the change that was made for Season 5 overall is good. For junglers, it's definitely nice to basically be guaranteed to get the speed buff. Obviously you want to have someone like scouting, and there could be the chance that there's like a full team invade on the speed buff or something, but it's relatively safe that you will have your first speed buff, and not many factors can play against that. You can share that maybe with one person, but usually we'll have everyone else starting in their lanes from what it looks like, and then going to the buff camps after the first wave, or having the jungler clear that for them, or whichever it is. But I think overall it works out quite nicely. It's quite a good way in which this is approached, in which the balance, so to speak, when it comes to buff starts and lane starts has panned out here. What the downside of that is, which is not mentioned here, which I have to state because I think it's a very important point, is that it takes away a lot of flexibility for everything but what the jungler does afterwards. Because in the end, you don't have the choice to start at red buff anymore, you don't have the choice to start at purple anymore, you don't have the choice to start at blue anymore. That's all gone. You have to start in lane because of the fact that the lane will clash 5 seconds before the buffs even spawn, and it would just be way too much of a wait to go for the buff camps first in that case. The biggest part of flexibility that you're left with at this point is actually if you want to start your support in the dual lane or somewhere else, really. But in my eyes, from a biased jungler's perspective, this is a risk or a trade-off worth taking, when that means that the starts into the game will be a lot more straightforward. Everyone basically knows what to do at the start of the game, and you can plan your pathing a lot better after that. Let us change topics here, because we have something else we haven't talked about, and that is from the last Ajax post. And there are two things specifically that I hadn't addressed because I didn't find the time to. The first one is, Season 4 concern, Smite has no early game or laning phase. The response, Season 5 discussion. This is purely a conquest pacing issue. We definitely want to look for conquest only solutions. This is also intentional. In Smite, we intend to ramp up the action to team fights fairly early. However, in Season 4, we agree that it has become too fast and punishing. In Season 5, you'll see many changes to slow down the early game more and keep people closer in level. That's exactly what's happening on PTS already. You will see that especially in the early stages you will level up much slower, and then later in the game it accelerates a lot. Lane minions are getting tankier and early XP sources are being lowered. We will adjust the late game to making sure matches still end in a timely manner to go along with this. Again, this is exactly what we're seeing at the moment. Smite is designed to focus on action game mechanics. Smite is less focus on last hits and more focus on movement and dealing damage. We intend players of all lanes to move into their jungles and to kill more things between waves, or challenge their opponents during this time. In Season 5, we very specifically kept at least one objective near each lane for this purpose. This is our definition of the early game in competitive Smite. However, we also added more space between lanes to make it harder to clean sweep entire jungle areas and to put more weight on players' decisions involving rotations as the game progresses. I think this is overall a very good decision, as we will see an extended early phase where, well, junglers are in the jungle, laners are in the lane, and then it develops from there, especially with the minions being tankier as well. The other concern, Season 4 concern, gaining a level advantage is too powerful. Season 5 discussion. This may be true in Smite, but progression to gain an advantage over your opponent is a core mechanic in the game. I think that's understandable. There should be some benefit from outleveling the enemy solo laner, for example, by quite a few levels and getting an advantage through that. Conquest is also the game mode where you tend to see the most level disparity between players, so again, we would want to look at Conquest solutions only. That is correct, and especially solo lane was an example here later. We've also had this with the ADC being on his own a lot, just these side lanes being too isolated, and that's something that can mostly be adjusted by the meta. If somebody has to split XP, if somebody has to rotate out more, they will not level up as much. So, or on the other hand, if there's more XP in the jungle, then others can keep up better in terms of XP, if the mid laner can clear some other camps, etc. We are implementing a large set of XP changes in Season 5 Conquest to make it more difficult to gain an early level advantage. Teams will have to make more decisions about which members of the team will get more solo farm and thus be higher level. In previous seasons, we have seen players adjust their strategies to allow certain guard classes to farm more and level up over others. This can happen even when there are no major design changes to cause such a shift. We encourage the evolution of the meta in ways like this, and we would hate to stifle creativity or to force one class to always be the best pick for solo farming. Also understandable, though at some point sometimes we'll have certain measures that have to be taken, like for example, the situation that we had with ADCs lately was a bit too crazy, and the support being forced back into duo from what it looks like in Season 5 for a fair bit kinda evens that out. These changes will also heavily reduce the amount of Snowball in the game, especially in the early game, alleviating this concern at the most punishing time of a match. Many of these points were decided on during the earliest parts of Smite development, and I believe they are crucial to its success over the years. The game was intended to be fast, have lots of kills and less farming. This is the foundation that Smite was built on, and we continue to build with these goals in mind. I can very much agree with most of what was said here. I see these changes right now in front of me with Season 5 being on PTS, and I think that most of them have been implemented very decently. We'll probably have some changes to XP spooling later on the road because it goes a little bit crazy once you hit a certain level, but that's another story. That's not kind of deterring from the overall goal. It's not distracting from what we're talking about here, because what we see is that the approach that's taken now will make the games more interesting. You will have a more even combat overall, you will have less Snowball, and you will have more interesting strategies for players to somehow still get a lead. In conclusion, I very much agree with the points that Ajax is making in the context especially of Snowball and how the early game should be, and many of the other points he's making here as well. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button, maybe the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out. So I actually figured out my demonetization issue, and it was my outro. As such, feel free to click any of the links around here right now. There will be new outro music as soon as I find something nice. Until then, as you guys requested, I will do the outro music myself. You're welcome.